morning, church. My name is Rod Spencer, and welcome to this morning's service. I just want to say a big thank you to Chris and to Joe for inviting me to be part of this Kingdom series, and also a big thank you to everyone who's spoken before me. In particular, thank you to Rich Olafia for speaking last week on the Kingdom mindset, and just how incredibly important this Kingdom mindset is, and how it can be influenced or disrupted based on a culture that we find ourselves in, or an atmosphere that we find ourselves in. And so this morning I want to just tell you a story about how God taught me a very important lesson around kingdom mindset, and how to keep it, how to hold on to it during these storms that we find ourselves in. So my journey starts in 2009. I was in Cape Town and praying to God one morning that He would guide me into the next season of my life, and He was very clear. He said to me He wants me to go serve His children in Africa, and with that He gave me a vision. I wrote the vision down and I drew it out, and He said, go and find that vision, don't start it, and I'll equip you along the way. This was mid-2009. I went to Botswana, to Swaziland in search of this vision, and eventually landed up in Zimbabwe, Bulawayo, towards the end of 2010. I was 25 years old and working for an organization using agriculture as a way to minister to communities, and it was an incredible time of my life. We saw incredible miracles being performed. God's provision during that time was absolutely amazing. My particular role within this group was to open up markets and to make sure that all the produce that was produced in our 3 commercial farms, as well as our training center that was called Ebenezer, and all of the communities that we worked with, making sure that all that produce got to the markets. So I was involved in the logistics and the research into finding new markets, and with that came a lot of driving. I was driving to the farms, I was driving around town. And for those of you who know Zimbabwe, there are lots of roadblocks, and these roadblocks are not very friendly. They're normally manned by policemen or army people, and they are pretty much just an atmosphere of fear and intimidation when you arrive there. And in the beginning I hated them. I used to drive up to these roadblocks and just felt inadequate. I used to feel nervous. Even though I hadn't done anything, you just had this bubble inside you, which wasn't very nice. But then what God showed me was, even though this atmosphere of fear and this intimidation that were at these roadblocks and other pockets of Zimbabwe, that even though that power of that fear was so tangible, it was almost like a currency. If you could create it, you could buy anything that you wanted. Even though it had that power, God showed me there was something more powerful, and that was love. And He showed me how to love these policemen. He showed me how to treat them like a friend, to treat them with respect. And with that, my mindset changed completely. I knew that God had sent me to Zimbabwe to serve anybody He put in my path, and clearly these policemen were put in my path for a reason. So my mindset completely changed. When I looked at these roadblocks, I used to get excited. I used to wonder how God was going to use me, wonder what the interaction was going to be like. I used to approach them with joy in my heart. And every single experience I had, even when they tried to intimidate me, ended up with joy at the end of it. To the extent that I even had a policeman invite me back to his office to play foosball. That's how well that interaction went. Anyway, so God had changed my mindset, my approach was different, it was amazing. Then we were on a business trip to Harare, and whilst we were traveling, I was just praying and I was thanking God for what He was doing with us and how He was using us. And I asked Him to use me more. I said, God, please put me on the front line. Put me in the lion's den. Take me into the lion's den and use me. Fast forward a week or 2 or 3 later, I'm not too sure how much time had passed, and we were in the middle of our onion harvest. So We were harvesting out of all of the farms, and we were packaging them into these onion pockets, and we'd run out of onion pockets, and they asked me to go get onion pockets. Very random. So I drove to a part of Bulawayo that I wasn't familiar with, and it was there that I started getting a bit lost. So I pulled over onto the side of the road and asked a lady for directions. Before I knew it, I had two policemen next to my window telling me that they're arresting me because the action I had taken of pulling over onto the side of the road was reckless driving, and I'd put people's lives in danger, and they're arresting me, and that I must follow them to the police station now. So I followed these policemen, and the whole time I was following them, I was just like, Lord, please, you have to get me out of this. In Zimbabwe, they treat traffic offences very harshly, whether it's talking on your phone, running a robot, or stop streets, or whatever it is, they treat it very, very harshly. So I knew that this was a serious situation. The fact that they had asked me to actually follow them to the police station, they're taking it to that extent, means that this was serious. I got to the police station, and they very quickly read me the riot act and told me that I'm being arrested, but I can't have a court hearing on the Friday, so I have to hand in my passport, because the next week was when I would have my hearing as such, and they didn't want me leaving the country. So I had to walk back to my vehicle, collect my passport. Whilst I was there, I took my wallet out and I left it in the vehicle because I didn't want to pay a bribe. This was going to be a story of God taking me out without me having to pay a bribe. It was going to be a story of God protecting me. So I walked in, and the two policemen that had arrested me were standing in front of me. I handed them my passport, and they explained that they had to take me in for questioning, and they were going to take me into this room. And just before I was about to approach this room, I felt this arm come around my shoulder, and I looked next to me, and there was this policeman. I couldn't see his rank, but he definitely had a higher authority than the two policemen in front of me. And he had his arm around me, and he looked at me and he said, "Hello, my brother, how are you?" I'd obviously seen better days, but I said, "I'm fine." And then with his arm around me, he looked at these other two policemen and he said, "This is my brother, and he will talk with you until the morning." He looked at me, he said, "You're going to be okay," and he left. And then I followed these two policemen into this room. I was very confused at this stage because I didn't know what talk until the morning meant. I didn't understand what was going on. And these policemen started asking me questions. Where am I from? Why am I in Zimbabwe? How long have I been here for? How do I know Zimbabwe so well? Am I conspiring? Etc., etc. I treated them with respect and with love, and I didn't let fear come in. I was using what God had shown me to use with the policeman at the roadblock in this situation. And the one policeman could see he wasn't getting anywhere with me. So he stood up and he said, he's going to leave me and this other policeman to talk. He left the room, closed the door. I didn't know what talk meant, but very quickly I realized it was this policeman trying to talk me into a bribe. And very quickly, after a couple of questions he was asking me, I just said to him, "My friend, you must understand one thing. My heart does not let me pay." And before I could even say a bribe, he stopped me and he said, "It's okay," handed me my passport and said, "You're free to go." With that, I grabbed my passport, walked as quickly as I could out of that police station, head held high, praising the Lord. "Thank you, Father. You took me out. You saved me. I didn't have to pay a bribe." And this was just glorious. As soon as I got to my vehicle and I sat down, praising God, "Thank you for taking me out," I felt almost an audible voice say to me, "I was always going to take you out because I sent you in. I sent you into the storm. I sent you into the lion's den. I sent you into that police station to pray with those policemen. But the only prayers you could say were the prayers for yourself. The only thing you could do was self-preserve." I'd missed it. In that moment, I realized I'd asked God to send me into the lion's den weeks before, and he did. He sent me into the lion's den with the mission of praying with those policemen. But all I could do was think about myself and pray that God takes me out of that lion's den. Now, a lot of Christians might tell the story a little differently, and it would probably be a testimony of victory, of how God had saved them out of a dangerous situation. But this wasn't the case for me, and I think we can all agree that it was clear that God was answering a prayer and that He was sending me into a storm. And I feel like as Christians, an encouragement is that our testimonies need to be less about how God gets us out of the storm and more about how God uses us whilst we are in that storm. That's where the power lies. And I think if we can have the right mindset, a kingdom mindset, our testimonies will be more and more like that. Now, a story that tells us a great story of kingdom mindset is David and Goliath. And as Di has read so nicely for us, thank you, Di. But the story of David and Goliath is not a story of David being saved out of the clutches of a giant. No one really tells the story like that. And the story has been misinterpreted many a time, but it's never really been told like that. David and Goliath is a story of a young man who put his hand up and said, God, use me. It's a story of a young man who had a kingdom mindset to the extent that he was the only person to put his hand up and say, I will take on that giant. Not because of my own strength, but because he has insulted the army of God. And I know that this fight is the Lord's. It's not mine. Now, this is an incredible story, and I don't want to take us through it because I think we're all familiar with it. But what I do want to do is just highlight a few little areas of David and Goliath that I think have helped me and hopefully will help you. So the first is, don't expect a briefing. David didn't get a briefing from God that he was going to fight a giant. It wasn't a case of David sitting in the fields with the sheep and God saying to him, I'm going to send you to fight a giant. The reality is that God didn't even tell David he was going into a fight in the first place. David was actually sent to deliver cheese and bread to his brothers and to the generals at the army. He wasn't sent to fight. But when he got there, that's when he saw the giant, he saw Goliath, and he realized what he was there for. Recognize your equipping. David, once he had put his hand up and said, I will fight Goliath, Saul took him aside to question him, to ask him, how can we send you in? Why and how are you going to do this? And very quickly, after David had explained to Saul that, and he used these words, he said, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hands of this Philistine. He recognized his equipping. He realized that God had taught him how to fight lions and bears, even to the extent that when Saul agreed with him and said he can go and fight, and Saul said to him, take my sword and take my armor, David's response was, I cannot go in these because I'm not used to them. David recognized the equipping, so that when he went in to fight Goliath, he knew what he was going to use. He knew that God was sending him in because he had equipped him. The third point is, prepare for a victorious fight, not a rescue mission. David took 5 stones with him, even though he only needed 1. He was prepared for a fight. He knew that the victory would be there, but he didn't know how it was going to roll out. He didn't know that he was only going to need 1 stone. He took 5 and he was ready. He was ready for a fight. He also didn't back down. When he arrived at the front line and was prepared to go in and fight Goliath, Goliath insulted David. He tried to create an atmosphere of fear. and he did so like this. Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. This is what this giant, this 7-foot giant, was saying to David when he saw him at the front line. David acknowledged that culture. He acknowledged the atmosphere that was in that moment, that it was fear. All that Goliath could do was try use fear to cripple David like he had the army. But David was taking none of it. He acknowledged the culture, he acknowledged the atmosphere. David's response, which I think is an incredible response to the Philistine, was as follows. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you've defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I'll strike you down and cut your head off. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. How's that for a response, a kingdom mindset response to a giant that's been insulting the Israelite army for so many days, paralyzed an Israelite army with fear? And this is the response that comes from this young man as he's about to charge in for this battle. Now, speaking of charging, this is the last point I want to leave you with. Charge forward. In the story of David, as the Philistine moved closer to the battle line, which he had drawn days before, a battle line in the sand, as Goliath moved forward, it says that David charged towards Goliath. He didn't stand there waiting for the fight to come to him. He didn't stand there saying, Lord, please help me, please help me. He charged in. He charged in knowing that the victory was going to be there. He charged in knowing that there was going to be a fight. But he charged in with a kingdom mindset, knowing that this fight wasn't his, it was God's, and he was sent there for a purpose. He put his hand up, God chose him, and he was there. He was going into the storm. He was charging into the storm, not concerned how he was going to get out. This, my friends, is a kingdom mindset. So in closing, my prayer for us is that when we make ourselves available to God, that he would find sons and daughters who have acknowledged that they have been equipped to charge forward into any storm that stands in front of them with absolute courage, knowing that the battle will be won because the battle is the Lord's. Thank you.